let's talk about the Steam Deck, shall we?
Ah, nice.
Let's
Okay.
talk about the Steam Deck. There is a lot to go over. So, for those of you who missed the video that went up today, I
Go watch
suspect
it.
most of you watched it, but here is kind of the speeds and feeds in a slowed down, a little bit more digestible fashion because I was going a
Yes.
million miles a minute and I didn't really have a choice because I had a grand total from walking in the front door to walking out the front door. I had about 2.5 hours. So that included more than half an hour of being inside the building, but not allowed to touch the Steam Deck yet. And that included about 20 minutes and change of packing up my things, not being allowed to touch the Steam Deck, and walking out. So my big thing going into it was that this is a piece of hardware that I'm really excited about. It's a category of devices that I really love. Portable gaming PCs. I mean, it's kind of like how way back when I was in university, right? I was super into small form factor gaming PCs, and this is kind of like it's like that, but on roids, right? The smallest form factor gaming PC, because it's more than just a handheld console. It is a full-fledged PC. The fact that it has a USB-C like docking connector on it means that you can power this thing thanks to USB power delivery off of a device that can run a display, peripherals, high-speed networking. The sky is the freaking limit. It is running a desktop grade Linux operating system. All Valve has done is they've put a bunch of development work into their Proton. It's not an emulator. It's more like a translation layer between DirectX and, whether it's Vulkan or OpenGL, I guess it doesn't really matter, to Proton, because both of those are supported on Linux. So they've put this development work into this translation layer, and then this, basically what is Steam Big Picture skin that runs on top of the translation layer to play your games. But other than that, it's just Linux. It's running freaking Linux. Unlike what Nintendo allows you to do, you can say, hey, look, I actually don't want to play games right now. And you can do whatever the you want. That is so cool. It's just a computer, man. Like, if I was in charge of Valve, which I'm not, and it's a good thing because this is a terrible tagline. But, I would say, my marketing for it would be, it's just a computer, man. Steam Deck. That's not how they're going to market it. They're really going to focus on it as a gaming device, and that's the right thing to do, because you want to get this in the hands of gamers. You want it to be the same kind of slick, polished experience, navigating the store, navigating your game library, that you would have on other handheld consoles. Not that there are that many of them these days, but with also the flexibility to go way deeper than that. I mean, now all of a sudden you've got the Steam Mod Workshop. You're not just playing the game the way it's meant to be played. You can play it however the heck you want. I love that. I mean, play the game how you want. That's a better tagline. That's a way more on-message tagline. Also, still not good enough, but I'm coming up with these on the spot. So give me a break here. Now let's talk about the screen. So 1280 by 800. I feel like I covered this in pretty good depth during the video, but Luke, I think this is where you might want to chime in. How do you feel about the screen? Because I know that not everyone agrees with my take on it, not by a long shot.
I think I mostly do, actually. I like, in ideal world, I would want the resolution to be higher, but there is some amount of performance benefit from having a smaller resolution screen.
Absolutely.
And not just in terms of like more frames per second. There's also performance benefit in regards to battery. So that is kind of nice. But I think my probably biggest qualm with it is it not being OLED, which is, I think, something that you share.
I do.
So I think we're mostly on the same board there. And you made a really interesting observation in the video that I didn't think about going into it, but makes a lot of sense. For content viewing, yeah, that's probably not going to feel that great. But yeah, for games, I don't think it's too bad. Obviously, I wouldn't want that in a desktop format, but you can dock it. and then you can have another monitor, right? In a mobile experience, that's a compromise that I'm happy to take personally.
Yeah, it's an interesting note how you talk about the battery improvement from going for a lower resolution. So there's a few kind of elements to that. One of them is that you might make the argument, well, Luke, come on, you could just have a 1080p display and run your games at 720. We are way past, in my opinion, and this is going to be a hot take. Some people are not going to like this, but I think we are way past the pixel density threshold where running at native resolution is necessary. There, I said it. At a normal distance, looking at moving content, okay? So I'm not talking, fine text while you're sending emails or word processing or anything like that. Or, anything that requires pixel perfect precision, like photo retouching or video editing. I'm talking about consuming content. I first had this realization when we did our review of the LG Ultrafine. This must have been about 3 years ago at this point. So that's that 5K monitor that LG released that only worked in 5K on a Mac, but you could run on a PC as long as it had Thunderbolt, if I recall correctly, but it would only run at 4K. And to my eye, there was no difference. I couldn't tell the difference between 4K and 5K at that size if we had two different monitors side by side, and I couldn't even tell when the 5K monitor was running 4K. Now, for those of you who are young, this concept of making sure that you're always running your display at native resolution is a relatively new idea. CRTs had kind of a factory, optimal suggested resolution, but because they were just a gun, like firing at these little, what are they, electrons? I can't remember what they're firing. They're firing something at a phosphor coated like glass piece. The dots that it fired, you could fire them anywhere. So you could run them out of spec. You could say, let's say you bought a CRT that was 1600 by 1200, 60 hertz. Well, you could maybe run that at 1280 by 960 would have been the correct aspect ratio for a CRT. So 1280 by 960, 75 or 85 hertz. So you could decide how you wanted to run the display, and both of them would look equally sharp. Then along came LCDs, and if you ran them at anything other than their native resolution, they would look like absolute garbage. But that was more true in the days when monitors were 19 inches running at 1280 by 1024, right? Like that is not a lot of pixels. Here, we're talking about something that is 7 inches running at 1280 by 800. It is 1/4 the size. And so at a reasonable viewing distance, I would make the argument that whether you were running a 720p native panel or a 1080p panel, you could easily just run your game at 720p, and most people probably wouldn't notice the difference. In fact, many phone manufacturers already do this with their 1440p panels. They'll have them run at 1080p in order to save battery because it's less work for the GPU to render. So if someone were to say, well, Valve should have just put a 1080p display so I could have the best of both worlds and run it at 720p, you might be forgetting something. If it's an emissive, or excuse me, not an emissive display, if it is a backlit display, when you increase the pixel density, so that is of the actual film itself, of the panel, when you increase the pixel density, you increase the amount of actual wiring. Like every pixel has to have power and signal, right? So you increase the actual amount of wiring that is in that layer. And what you do is you increase the amount of backlight strength that is needed to shine through it. So Valve going with a 7, I keep calling it 720p, even though it's 1280 by 800. It's 16 by 10 rather than 16 by 9. But I'm going to use them interchangeably here. I'm sorry. So even though Valve went with a 720p, like an HD panel, I think it was justified from a power savings perspective and from an expectation setting perspective. This thing is not going to be running games at 1080p 60 FPS. Not AAA games, especially not new ones. You would absolutely be able to run older games like that. You want to play some Psychonauts on your Steam Deck? Oh, that would be a great experience. In 1080p, yeah, it would be sharper. But I think you could also get a lot of the way there by super sampling the game anyway, if you really wanted to. And because it's just a PC, you can do that. Fine. Render the game at 1080p. Now, obviously, that's something we didn't have time or tools to test. We weren't even allowed to capture game footage. But I would make the argument, I would guess, I would hypothesize that we'd get a lot of the way there running at 1280 by 800, super sampled to 1920 by 1200, and then rescaled for the display. I think we'd get a lot of that sharpness back.
Right.